Наші горішенькі, як роса на сонці, запануєм і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці. І душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу. І покажем, що ми браття козацького
Hello everyone, I am the Enforcer, and tonight is the fundraiser night. I hope everyone supports the fundraiser a whole load, and let me explain who tonight's fundraiser is for. Sorry for the stutter there, but let's get into it. Tonight's fundraiser is Humane Society International. Humane Society International is a global organization, of course a humane society, that has been working tirelessly in Ukraine since the start of the war to make sure that all of the pets that have been left behind and the pets who sadly no longer have owners due to Russians committing atrocities against them will have a safe place to live and hopefully be reunited with their owners soon or in the future. And so I'd hope that we get a lot of support. This has been something that's been highly asked for as a fundraiser to support the pets in Ukraine that have been put into terrible situations themselves. And that has been something that we have shown on this channel a whole load, with videos of dogs missing their owners, videos of dogs and cats being pulled out of the rubble of destroyed buildings who no longer have owners. And we've also seen some unfortunate sights where the Russians have gone out of their way to eat or kill dogs that have been left inside the country. And so I hope we can all come together once again as the Leaf Spring Army as usual, and help out as much as we can and get as much support for the Humane Society International, which has been doing untold amount of work in Ukraine so far. I've already chipped in my $100 tonight. If you would like to check, you can ask all the viewers, and you can also go back through the live chat and see that I put mine in almost like first thing. And I hope that y'all can help me help Ukraine, if that will further inspire some of y'all to maybe help out, because the Leaf Spring Army has done unbelievable things before. We have raised $120,000 at this point, not including tonight's fundraiser, to help out with causes that are in Ukraine and operating around the country, and I hope that tonight we can do amazing things once more. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the schedule for tonight's news. Starting off, we will be covering the Northern Front news. We've had a little bit of it come out today, some unfortunate news and some good news, kind of a mixed bag there, and we will then move on to the well, actually, no, I'm going to do a little bit of a change tonight. We're actually going to cover the international news, the Northern Front news, and also the news from inside of Russia in one group today. We'll then pause to take 3 to 5 questions from the chat and also recognize some of our highest donors on the fundraiser tonight. We will then move on to the location unknowns. We have a decent amount of them today, somewhere around, I believe, 14 of them. We will then cover all of these, and then we will move on to the Southern Front news. Today, this will also include Mariupol, because we haven't had a lot of news coming out of the Southern Front as of today. And then once we do that, we'll hang around to answer some more questions and hype everyone up so that way we can make sure to reach well beyond the goal of tonight's fundraiser. So with that, before we start, Matthew, I can already see it, but I want you to tell everyone how much the fundraiser has gotten so far, because it's exciting to see that we've made it this far already.
So we are currently sitting at $2.7 thousand already of our $10,000 goal, and we're not even 4 minutes into the stream. So if it keeps going at this rate, we're going to be doing pretty good tonight.
Also, everyone, make sure, I also want to make this clear because I want the fundraisers to be as transparent as possible. The fundraisers are run through the YouTube Give program. That's a program that the YouTube company has created for YouTube channels like me to run fundraisers. How it works is that when you send in the money to the donation, the EIN number that is associated with this nonprofit has a separate little account that YouTube makes, and all of the money y'all send in gets sent directly into that account. So there is no percentage of this that I'm taking. I'm running this entirely just to support the fundraiser I made, and all the money goes to YouTube, which then will manage all of the donations, make sure that all the paperwork is correct, and then they send it off to the nonprofit that the fundraiser is for. Of course, they say on their website that 100% of all of the donations that are raised tonight will go to the nonprofit that it's specified for, and they will handle all the fees involved. So once again, we want to make sure that it's transparent and it's known that it is, of course, not something questionable. It is, of course, a YouTube sanctioned program. And so with that, without further ado, we are going to get right into the news. Starting off in Kyiv today with some very sad news, and I hated to see it, but this is something that does happen in war. A young child attended, and I believe that he may be the only surviving member of his family, but this young child had to attend the funeral of his mother. And I have to say, this is incredibly sad to see. The poor boy standing there all alone. And this is the grave of his mom. And here he is standing in front of, I'm assuming, the church. And then here he is, he's standing by his mother's coffin. And I believe that may actually be the father. But the poor boy is without a mother now. And it's incredibly unfortunate to see that the Russians have once again killed another civilian, and this series of pictures here gives you a good idea of what that actually entails, because we always hear about civilian casualties and it's always just a number, but when you see pictures like this, you see what civilian casualties actually entail, which is torn apart families and scarred children for the rest of their lives who've had to go through such a terrible event. It really puts it into perspective how terrible a thing like this is, and so that's really all there is to say about it. I hope this does inspire a lot of y'all to make sure to help out any way you can. Of course, we are running the fundraiser tonight, but there are many other ways to help out. You can, of course, always try and volunteer. Ukraine is still accepting volunteers, and there are many other ways that you can help out, and I'm sure that your local community has a large list of ways you can. And so with that, we're now going to move on from the sad news, and we're going to move on to some of the good news that we've seen today that I'm very happy to see. And starting off, we've seen that the Secretary Blinken has visited President Zelensky. I believe that this is the first time that someone as high up in the American government structure as the Secretary of State has visited Ukraine and directly the president, and so this is a great step in the right direction. As of now, the results of this meeting are currently unknown, but we can assume that there will hopefully be much more support heading in the direction of Ukraine now that there has been a face-to-face meeting in between the Secretary of State and President Zelensky. Of course, I have nothing but admiration for President Zelensky. He has been spearheading this war and has shown nothing but courage over the entirety of it. And so I'd have to say, everyone give him a huge amount of support, because that is, of course, one of the greatest statesmen probably we will ever see in modern history, someone up there with the likes of Winston Churchill. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from inside of Kyiv, where we can see another bit of sad news as air raid sirens interrupted the Easter service in this cathedral in Kyiv. So I'm going to let y'all see this video. It pretty much speaks for itself, and I'm not going to really talk so that way y'all can take in the ambience of it.
Почуття в однаковій мірі і біль, і радість, що ми все-таки справляємося, і що країна єдина, і люди єдині, і що в нас виходить нас захищати і виборюватися.
Ми святкуємо не тільки Воскресіння Господнє, ми святкуємо торжество життя над смертю. І зараз от в цей момент, коли смерть прийшла на українську землю, оце торжество життя над смертю – це особливо важливо.
Христос воскрес!
Воістину.
Христос воскрес!
Воістину.
Атакує. На жаль, звершуючи богослужіння пасхальні, ми чули всі, як звучали сирени про те, що є повітряна тривога.
It's unfortunate to hear that such a terrible thing as war interrupts the Easter service. And of course, here in the Christian world, Easter is one of the most important religious holidays of the year, as it does signal the resurrection of Christ. And so it's unfortunate to hear that the Russians, of course, have no respect for the civilian population once again. We know that there is no military objectives that they're pushing any longer in Kyiv, and so the fact that the city had to sound the air raid sirens because of incoming attacks on the city tells you that they are directly attacking the civilians, and they don't even have respect for a holiday that is coveted inside of Russia itself, the Easter holiday. The Russians are also an Eastern Orthodox country, and so on this Sunday, they are also celebrating Easter as well, and this appears to have had no effect on the Russian high command and what they assume is a right thing to do on such a holy holiday as Easter, especially in Ukraine and Russia on this very day. And so with that, we're now going to move on outside of Kyiv and move on to the area of Chernihiv, where today we've seen that there's been more evidence of destruction. Of course, this is drone footage, and there hasn't been any fighting in the area for quite some time, and I haven't gotten any evidence of attacks either, but nonetheless, this footage shows the amount of damage that Chernihiv went through over the few weeks in the first month of fighting that it endured. So I'm going to let y'all see this footage. This footage was, of course, taken by the Telegraph. We can see here what may have been a rocket or missile attack on the side of this building that has left a large chunk of it exposed. We can, of course, see the rest of the buildings in the city have nearly been razed to the ground or burned out. We can see that one of the soccer fields, for the American viewers, football fields for the European viewers, has been attacked as well by the Russians, including right in the center where we can see a large crater on the field itself. And with that, that's the end of that video, but it does show the damage that Chernihiv endured through its short few weeks of fighting. And so if that doesn't give you an idea of the amount of damage that the Russians are able to inflict over a short period of time, you can imagine the level of damage in cities like Mariupol and Kharkiv that have been on the front line for 2 months at this point. Speaking of which, I forgot to mention that today is the beginning of the second month of the war in Ukraine. 60 days have passed, and today is the 60th day of the war. And so it is amazing to me, and once again I have to make the note, that it is incredible to me, if not unbelievable, that the Ukrainians have not only managed to hold beyond the first few days and the first month, but we are now going into the second month, and it appears the Ukrainians are still holding, and they are still making small amounts of progress on the southern front, even with the Russian offensive in its 5th day of operation. So I've got to say, huge credit to the Ukrainians and their bravery and their valor and their dogged resistance against these Russian invaders who have sought to remove themselves of their own sovereignty and install a puppet government to make sure that that Ukraine is suited to Russia's interests. Well, that will now move on to the Russian news, as inside of Bryansk today, we've seen that the oil depot in that city has caught on fire. Of course, we don't have a lot of evidence as to why this fire has been caused, but nonetheless, it does appear that it was a deliberate act, maybe by the Ukrainians, but we don't have any information to confirm, and we will be waiting to see if there is any information that comes out in the future saying that a Ukrainian missile attack has caused this damage. As we can see there, the fire is raging off in the distance. Of course, oil silos being hit is a very large hindrance in both sides' logistical chains. Oil and gas is one of the main ways that militaries operate, as trucks, trains, aircraft, and everything in between does operate off of gas and oil. So it's a good thing to see that the Ukrainians may have been able to inflict more damage on the Russian oil supplies, but we also know that in turn the Russians have been inflicting a sizable amount of damage on Ukraine's oil reserves. Hopefully that doesn't hinder Ukraine all too much, and hopefully these attacks are making the Russian logistical situation that much worse, because we already know that the Russian logistical situation is pretty far off from good. It's in fact poor. And so with that, we're now going to move on from that video, and we're going to move on to someone y'all may have seen before, and I related him to a crazy person here in the United States. And we can see that he's once again at it. And now he's not only threatening the Ukrainians with violence, he's now saying that once this war is over in Ukraine, they're going to focus on trying to kill NATO civilians as well. And you heard that right. He didn't make any pretense that the Russians haven't been attacking civilians. He said he's going to attack you, every single one of you people watching this live chat right now. He wants every single one of y'all suffering or dead. So remember that when you watch this video, because this is something I think is a large argument against the pro-Russian people here in the West. The Russians don't like a single one of us. They want us all dead. And so remember that, once again, when you're watching this video. But I'm going to let y'all watch it uninterrupted. Hopefully y'all can see the text-to-speech below on the video. And so I'm just going to let it play.
Специальная военная операция, я считаю, входит в новую стадию. Заметьте, украинцев уже не хватает. Уже пошла речь о том, что страны НАТО будут поставлять, ну, де-факто свое оружие. Мы сейчас увидим втягивание не только оружия НАТО, но и его операторов. То есть ясно, что сейчас мы де-факто начинаем воевать со странами НАТО. Мы сейчас будем перемалывать и военную машину НАТО, и, извините, так получится, граждан.
Unfortunately, I just saw it finally pop up on screen, so I'm going to actually go back and I'm going to read off what he's saying so that way y'all can hear it. And unfortunately, I will have to mute the video to make sure I'm saying it correctly and not stuttering or anything. So I'm going to mute it and start from the beginning because it looks like the translation was cut off halfway. So I'm just going to read it and let the video play. I believe the special military operation is entering a new stage. Ukrainians alone are no longer enough. Now they're talking about NATO countries supplying de facto their own weapons. We'll see not only NATO's weapons being drawn into this, but also their operators, de facto. We're starting to wage war against NATO countries. We'll be grinding up NATO's war machine, as well as citizens of NATO countries. When this operation concludes, NATO will have to ask itself, what do we need to defend ourselves? Do we have the people to defend ourselves? And there will be no mercy. There will be no mercy. Not only Ukraine will have to be denazified, the war against Europe and the world is developing a more specific outline, which means we'll have to act differently and to act much more harshly. And so what that man just said right there in that video is that he wants to come out from Russia. He wants the Russian army to expand its operations beyond the borders of Ukraine and come and inflict suffering on every single NATO citizen within the NATO bloc as much as possible. Now, if that's not a sick guy, I don't know what is. You don't see a lot of people here in the United States acting with so little reservation as to say, we want to go into Russia and we want to slaughter the Russian citizens. You don't see that. You see Americans talking about we should lash out against the Russian government and the people in charge. And, you know, we try and remove the citizens from it and say, maybe they're misguided, maybe they don't know what's going on. But this guy makes no distinction here with us in the West. He wants all of us dead. And I have to say that if that's how that guy is thinking, I think he needs to be put on a list of criminals that if we're ever able to hold accountable for their crimes and their talk, if anyone should be held accountable for their talk, which is getting into a little bit of a dangerous territory, that man right there ought to be held accountable for asking for harsh things to be committed among civilian populations, such as deaths and tortures and such things like that. And so with that, we're now going to move on from the Russian news. You can see that what's going on in Russia isn't exactly great. But with that, we're now going to move on into France, where we've got news today that Emmanuel Macron has won the re-election. He has won over his opponent Le Pen, who was known to be a pro-Russian sympathizer. Not to weigh into French politics, because while I make sure not to weigh in at all on American politics, I also want to make sure not to weigh in on anyone else's politics. This channel does not delve into that specifically on the stream. But to point out why that's important, the opponent, Le Pen, was actually a pro-Russian sympathizer and believed that the Russians were in the right somewhat in this war. Although she tried to backtrack that right before the election, it had been made clear over the many other years of her service as a politician in France that she was mostly pro-Russian. Emmanuel Macron did defeat her today in the election. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a percentage by what margin, but nonetheless, that will ensure that pro-Russian I guess you could say politicians do not take over in France and ensure that the French will be giving as much resistance as possible against pro-Ukrainian policies. And so with that, we're finally going to move on to New York, and then we'll answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat and also recognize some of our large donations. But here in New York, we've actually seen that the fervor of pro-Ukrainian sentiments has not died down in the United States, and there are still massive rallies occurring all around the country. Here we can see people in support of the Azov Regiment that is currently still holed up inside of Mariupol and fighting every single day to protect the civilians that are still within their realm of control. We know that there are loads of civilians, women and children, that are currently stuck in the bunkers inside of the Azovstal, and I hope for their safety, and I hope that the Azov defenders can ensure that the Azovstal remains in Ukrainian hands and safe. And so with that, here's this video.
But not only Azov. National Guard, Національна гвардія України також, поліція, батальйони морської піхоти. Люди, взагалі люди у Маріуполі.
So we can see there's a large amount of support still in the United States for the Ukrainians in this war. That's something I've been kind of concerned about recently, is that people around the world, really, this is just normal human intentions, have a very short attention span. And so as the war continues to drag on, less and less people will care about it. That's just kind of how it goes. But we can see here that that is not the case with this war, and people still care about it entirely and want as much support as possible to the Ukrainians, to the point that they will go out to the streets just to make it known. And so it's good to see that the United States has still not lost its fervor and its support for Ukraine. And with that, we have reached the end of the Northern Front news, the Russian news, and the international news. And so with that, before we move on to the location unknowns, we will answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat, and we're also going to recognize our largest donors to this fundraiser first. And so with that, who are our largest donors, Matthew?
Okay, so first up, we have hit 4.7 thousand on our fundraiser of the night. So incredible progress. We're almost halfway to our goal. So thank you everybody for putting in the donations very early in the stream. And real quickly, I'm going to recognize some donations here. Our top donors. We have a $250 donation from Mikhail Carlson, Politics is Unusual. We have a $200 donation from Red Queen 0324 and Paolo Curadini. And we have a couple of $100 donations. We have one from James Reyes. We have one from a guy called The Enforcer. Not sure who that is. We have one from AZ, and we also have one from Kubato King. And I actually missed one here. We have a $150 donation from Tony Wilson. So thank you very much to everyone who has donated. If I haven't called yours out, it's not because we're ignoring you. It's just that we can't call out every single donation. We'd be here all night. And as always, just a quick note, we aren't having any super chats tonight. Please send in your questions using @TheEnforcer, and they will be read live on stream tonight because there are no super chats. And with that being said, Enforcer, I am ready with questions when you are.
All right, we're going to try out something a little bit new tonight. I'm going to make sure that the answers are somewhat brief, because I know that a lot of people actually leave during the question segments, so I'm going to try and make it a little bit short, so that way I'm not torturing some of y'all a little bit too much. So with that, let's get to the first question.
And real quick, I just have to recognize one of our channel regulars absolutely has put in a astonishing donation of $750. Thank you very much, Rich Hogan. That is incredibly generous. And just thank you very much. That is definitely going to help out those poor animals that have been left in Ukraine. So thank you very much. I just don't even know what to say about that. It's a tremendous donation there.
Golly. I got to thank you so much, Rich Hogan. It is true. You're rich, because that is a massive donation. And I thank you so much for showing that much support to the poor little animals in Ukraine. I, of course, did add in the location unknowns a little video of Patron the bomb-sniffing dog today. And so hopefully that will inspire some people to make sure to add in to the donations tonight. And so I thank you so much, Rich Hogan, for that massive donation. That kind of support is the reason why people are, of course, great people. There's all kinds of people out there in the world, and I think here on this channel we have some of the nicest people on earth that help us, support us, and watch the streams. And so I thank you so much once again for your huge support. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the first question.
And the first question of the night is from Duncan VR, who says, Enforcer, Have 5 Russian targets to choose using the new Phoenix Ghost drones. What are the 5 Ruski targets that you would choose to blow up?
First off, the 5 of them, I don't think I could get to 5. I think I'll try and do 3. But the first one I do is logistics trucks. I don't know how large the Phoenix Ghost is. I believe it's actually kind of small. But I would go for the logistics trucks. The second thing I'd go for is Russian command units, command vehicles, and officers if they can be identified. And the third thing I'd go for is anything that will help the Russians logistically. I don't know if they're large enough to blow up bridges, but I would go for bridges that are behind the lines, so that way the logistical units of the Russian side will have a much harder time supplying their front. And so with that, I hope I answered that question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a comment from Nicholas Rodriguez, who says, just now, explosions at an oil storage facility in the Bryansk area, so large that they're visible via NASA's satellites.
Yes, we actually did cover that, and it does appear that a large amount of damage has been done to the oil silos. So we do know about that, and we did just report about that. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question, and then we're going to go to the location unknowns.
All right, and up next, we have a question from a longtime channel supporter, Bass Girl, who says, Enforcer, do you think Ukraine will lose all the areas that Russia is now occupying, or will they regain some territory? Thank you, Enforcer and Matt, for your hard work and dedication. I have been here since day 5.
Well, to answer that question, and I thank you so much for the kind words. It, of course, is incredibly nice to hear that a lot of people like the channel. But to answer that question, I think that the Ukrainians' goal is to recapture all of the land that has been taken by the Russians. We've seen their job become a lot easier as the Northern Front fell weeks ago, and now it looks like they're making small amounts of progress here on the Southern Front. But then again, their progress is being hindered because the Russians are throwing everything they have into a renewed offensive down there, which is currently in its 5th day, and we see no progress being made to furthering their goal of taking the entirety of the southeastern side of the country. So I do think that they will manage to regain a decent amount of that. But then again, I believe it's a little bit too early to find out if this will become the new ceasefire border like it did with the Donetsk and Luhansk fronts. But nonetheless, that is kind of my opinion on it, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. And so with that, we've actually reached the end of this question segment. If you would like to ask a question, make sure to add the enforcer, which is me. Matthew will, of course, compile those questions, and we will try and answer as many of them in the next, well, we'll only answer 3 of them in the next question segment, and then we'll answer more of them in at the very end of the stream. And so with that, we're going to now move on to the location unknowns, which we have a decent amount of. Starting off with the location unknowns, it looks like one Russian managed to be a little unlucky and he didn't make it out. It appears that this Russian convoy had been attacked, a huge deal. It looks like a large amount of the vehicles were destroyed, and we can see one of the Russian armored cars, it seems, trying to escape the area, but unfortunately, it looks like it didn't make it out. That's another armored car that the Ukrainians will add to the list of destroyed vehicles, and probably several personnel that were inside of it that will also be added to the markers. So with that, we can see the Ukrainians are not giving any mercy to the Russians, just like the Russians are giving no mercy to them, and they're making sure that none of the Russian convoys manage to survive in any way, shape, or form. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see a defender take shrapnel to the chest. The video isn't incredibly graphic. I think that this man's bulletproof vest absorbed most of it, but I think he got the brunt shock of the impact of it, but not really any kind of physical harm to himself. It happens 37 seconds in, and so I'm going to let the video play. And it is shocking because the guy takes it incredibly well. So, of course, this video is playing like a slideshow. I don't know why. Let's see if we can find another link for it. Golly. No link for it. I'm not going to be able to see squat with it like this. Let me refresh this page and see if that fixes the problem. There we go. Okay, that fixed it, it seems. So we're now going to fast forward a little. Is it still a slideshow? Hang on, I'm going to try that one more time, because there's no way I'm going to let this thing stay a slideshow. Alright, I'm going to keep it in this view and see if it messes up. Yeah, it's messing up again. Let me mess with the graphics quality here. We'll put it down on 360. See if that fixes it. Nope, that doesn't fix it. We're just going to skip forward to 37 seconds because while you may not be able to see the video all too well, you will hear the sound of the shrapnel hitting his vest and him going, ugh, and you know, because he got hit. And then he sits there for a second, he tries to assess whether he was wounded or not, and it seems he wasn't because it actually looked like at the end of the video, he just lifted his rifle back up and was about to begin to fire again. So, here's that part of the video. You can actually see it right there. You saw that? All right, the explosion happened right here in front of the car, about 50 yards away, and you can actually see the little piece of shrapnel come flying right at him and smack him dead on in the chest. It's really hard to see, but I'm going to play it about twice so that way y'all can see it the best you can. You saw it right there. All right, and I'm going to run it one more time, and then we're going to let the video continue. And so now he's taking a second to assess himself. The guy in front of him here on the ground, he is not shot. He's just reloading his rifle. He continues to fire right there. And so now that he's assessed that he's okay, he's now lifted the rifle. I'm sorry, wait a minute. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. He actually run it for a second. Again, I'm not sure if he's just reeling in the shock of having shrapnel hit him in the chest on the vest. I think the vest caught the shrapnel and it didn't go into his chest, or otherwise I think he would have probably been down on the ground because it looks like it went straight into his sternum. But nonetheless, you gotta say, the guy took that incredibly well. Considering that he had a massive piece of shrapnel fly right onto his chest, and he's only just grunting a little bit and trying to assess how bad off he is, you gotta say, that's one hell of a man right there to take shrapnel and act like that. Gotta give him a huge kudos there, because I don't know how I'd react if shrapnel hit me, and so, what a guy. I've got to say, that's one hell of a guy right there. I wish we could get his name, and I hope that he does get some kind of medal for that, because that was obviously definitely one hell of a thing to take shrapnel straight to the chest and just kind of keep on running. So anyways, with that, that's the end of that video, and we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can see the Ukrainians do something I think we here in the United States would do, which they've now mounted an anti-tank guided missile launcher to the back of an ATV. This is something. I haven't seen this before, but I'm not complaining. It looks like it's probably effective. We can also see that they put a little bit of a camo net across the ATV. And now they fired the ATGM at a Russian target in the distance. And I cannot tell due to the graphic quality whether it hit or not, although it doesn't look like it's hit yet. I cannot tell. Nope, it hit something right here, right where my mouse is circling. It looks like it's hit some kind of vehicle. So that is incredibly interesting to see. We see the Ukrainians starting to spread out into multiple directions with how their ATGMs are moved. We've seen them carried by hand. We've seen them carried by armored cars and such things like that. But we've never seen them mounted onto an ATV. This is some, I would honestly say this is some modern warfare direction stuff. This is a lot like the Tachanka of, 1919 times, Russian Civil War era. And so that's incredibly interesting to see that they're now coming up with improvised ATGM carriers. And I just got to say, that's a lot of ingenuity that went into that. I mean, like, it's a really simple solution, but still for them to actually think and go out of the box like that and start using an ATV to carry the ATGM around is incredibly interesting to me. And so, a very interesting clip of news, and I've got to give it to the Ukrainians with their ingenuity as well as their bravery. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a video of a supposed Russian ATGM attack on a supposed Ukrainian position. Of course, we didn't see any Ukrainians in this video, and I have to mute it because it has copyrighted music playing on it. But anyways, they fired the ATGM at these towers here, and it hits right at the base of one of them. But the thing is that we never saw Ukrainians in this video, and so I'm not really sure if this is once again another Russian propaganda video where they're just firing at an abandoned building and saying that there are Ukrainians inside of it, because we've seen them do that a lot. Nonetheless, I want to show it just in case if there were Ukrainian soldiers in there, and show that the Russians are in fact inflicting some level of damage or losses on the Ukrainians. Because that's one thing that, while I am pro-Ukrainian, I want everyone to know that there are losses that the Ukrainians are taking, and I think that furthers the case of how brave the Ukrainians are, because they're not having a cakewalk all the time. They may actually be getting it handed to them here and there, and nonetheless, these people keep on ticking day in and day out. They constantly are working and trying their hardest to make sure that the soldiers on the front line can keep on fighting, the civilians can keep on going about their daily lives, the farmers can keep on planting their crops, and that the government can keep on existing. And you've got to say that that's really something, considering that you see that the Ukrainians sometimes don't win every single confrontation. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainian artillery shelling Russian positions. We've seen this a large amount, but once again, it's incredibly good to see that the Ukrainians are giving it to the Russians. And so with that, we can see the first shell land right near this complex. It looks like it hit a vehicle dead on. We can also see some Kamaz and Ural 4320 trucks over on that side of the video. We can now see another shell landing in a similar location. We can now see another shell landing, and now you can actually see in this little clip, if we rewind here, the Russian trucks, one is on the road, and two are near a house, and I believe that they're trying to use the house as cover from one direction of artillery coming in. Hopefully, what they're assuming is that the house will soak up some of the rounds. But it looks like it wasn't the case for them, as the artillery still rained in directly on the vehicles and has probably caused a large amount of damage to them. As we can see, one of the vehicles is cooking off because it was directly hit. We can now see the artillery landing around the Russian vehicle still, and then the video ends there. We didn't get to see if the Russian unit was completely destroyed, but nonetheless, one vehicle down is, of course, one vehicle down. And so I'm very glad to see that the Ukrainians are still inflicting damage on the Russians on the front lines and also behind the lines, because that seemed most likely a logistics unit. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see an Su-34 flying at low level, deploying flares. This is, of course, something that we've seen here and there, but we have never seen an Su-34 at this low of flight deploying this amount of flares. So it is, of course, a bit of a new video. And so with this, you can see it dropping pretty much all of its flares onto that town. I don't know if the flares will actually burn once they hit the ground. I don't really know what flares are made of, to be honest. But nonetheless, we could see that they were dropped out of the back of the Su-34, and it is now evacuated out of the area. Hopefully, because Su-34s are small tactical bombers, hopefully the Ukrainians can manage to track this one down next time it comes into their airspace and shoot the thing down, and hopefully capture the pilots and get some important information about Russian aerial operations in that region. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see that the Ukrainians took a Russian tank down. Of course, this is great to see. This is the normal Stugna footage that we've seen a load, but it's always good to see it again. Hopefully, I hope all of y'all can agree. So we now can see the Stugna taking flight, heading towards its target. We can now see them aiming the Stugna downwards towards the tank. The Stugna is still on its way. And finally, the Stugna hit the tank and took it out. It's wonderful to see, once again, that the Russians never get a break or breathing room, because the Ukrainians manage to hit them when they're off their guard, on their guard, resting, sleeping, awake, running, hiding. They never get a break. The Ukrainians manage to find them every single way and make sure that they know that they are no longer welcome on Ukrainian soil. So I'm very happy to see that. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a rare video. And I have to say, this is an incredibly rare video of a Javelin destroying a Russian tank. I don't know why these videos are rare. We do know that the Ukrainians are apparently using Javelins on a large scale because they're asking for pretty much a constant supply of Javelin missiles, around 500 a day, to keep their Javelin anti-tank units running. So we know that they're not being lightly used by any means. But at the same time, we don't see a lot of videos of them being used. But here in this video, we saw a Javelin get successfully used and hit a Russian tank. And so with that, I'm going to show you all the video. Of course, I thank the man who edited this video. He actually blurred out the faces of the Ukrainians. This, of course, helps to protect their identity, because we know that the Russians will try and come for anyone they can find. And so we can see them lining up the Javelin here. They're about to fire it here in a second. And now the Javelin is on its way. We can now see the Javelin climbing. And the Russian tank is actually right there. And we can now see that the Javelin, after it flew up, it took a rapid descent downwards towards the tank and exploded on it or above it. I'm not exactly sure which mode the missile was in there, but nonetheless, that tank was wiped out. And once again, that is another tank for the record. Another tank that the Ukrainians have wiped out, another tank that will not terrorize the civilians of Ukraine. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next video where we can see footage of Russian losses. This, of course, is not too graphic, although it does show dead bodies. So if some of y'all are a little squeamish, I'd make sure to click off the video and revisit it here in a minute because it does show dead Russians. Nonetheless, I wanted to show this because it is proof, and a lot of people are always saying, where are the dead bodies? We used to have that a lot, and we have that every once in a while still, and here are some of them that do prove that the Russians are taking a large amount of losses just in this one area alone along this roadway. So hopefully the video loads. And so here it is. Of course, it's not NSFW, so it can be shown on YouTube. It's not graphic in any way. But there's the first one, right there. And there's the second one. We can now see a third one on a tank trap. While it's incredibly disturbing in a way to see a video like this, I think it's incredibly important to show because it does show that the numbers that the Ukrainians are coming up with aren't entirely wrong, and there is evidence of Russian soldiers being killed on the front lines in a large amount. There was 3 guys in just that one area, and if that doesn't tell you that the Russians are taking large losses just in that one area, because 3 guys to be dead in the same area is a high number, and considering that they haven't even evacuated their bodies when they apparently retreated or advanced, it tells you a lot about the Russian situation on the front because they don't even have the logistical ability apparently to remove most of the bodies. And so with that, that's the end of that video. Take it for what it is, and we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the turret of a Russian tank go flying. I would play the audio in this video, but it is kind of more of meme-ish audio, and I feel like considering that we just probably watched 3 crewmen, regardless whether this is a Russian tank or not, just get evaporated in some kind of ammo explosion, I don't really feel it's an appropriate audio to play, so I'm just going to let this play. We can see the Russian tank down there. It will be hit by an Atgm incredibly soon, right there. And we can see that the tank goes up like a Roman candle, and what's crazy is that that's the turret of the tank. Look how far that thing flew. Like you can see in the video, that thing flew hundreds of feet off of that tank, and that gives you an idea of the absolute power of the explosion that the ammo caused inside of that tank. So let's watch that again. And you can see that turret began the next Russian space program. It looks like it might be able to replace Roscosmos in refueling the International Space Station. Well, not refueling the International Space Station, resupplying the International Space Station, and ensuring that they can continue their operations. So, I think that's crazy. I actually haven't seen a turret fly off of a tank like that on film yet, and so that's the first time I've actually seen it, and I believe that's the first time that most of y'all have ever seen anything like that happen in real life. So, with that, that's the end of that video. If you want, of course, I also forgot to mention this as well. If y'all want to see this video and actually hear the audio on it, I actually have the link to the Day 60 map below. So if you want to actually hear the audio, make sure to go click on the link on the map, go check out this specific marker, and you can watch it for yourselves. And so with that, we're about to move on to the next location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainian army is still doing all it can to raise the people's spirits, as they've had bands traveling around from subway station to subway station playing music and trying to make sure that the Ukrainian civilians don't have too rough of a time in this war and that their spirits do remain high. And so I'm going to let y'all see this video and not really interrupt it too much because the bands are actually doing an incredibly good job. So here's the video. So it's good to see that the Ukrainian morale continues to stay high and that the Ukrainian bands are making their rounds and playing that wonderful anthem that the Ukrainians call their own. Of course, the lyrics are played every single day at the beginning and the end of the stream, and so if you would like to hear them and see them in their English translation, pretty much that video plays at the beginning of every stream. So make sure to come here and check it out because it plays 10 minutes after the stream begins. But without further ado, we're going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we're going to see our dog Patron get clean. And before we move on, I just wanted to remind everyone that we are running a fundraiser tonight for the Humane Society International, which is helping out dogs that are stuck inside of the war zones and making sure that they get all the help they deserve and need, because those poor little dogs have no idea what's going on, and the poor cats as well. And it's terrible to know that they had to be left behind by their owners in some cases because countries at the time weren't allowing them to take their pets across the border. And so with that, here's the video of Patron getting clean. Of course, a very cute dog, and we've seen a lot of this little fella here. He's defused hundreds of bombs, and he's finally getting a well-deserved bath. He looks like he's enjoying it. I really can't tell if he likes the bath or not. Actually, honestly, it doesn't look like he likes it. But nonetheless, it is something that Patron needs and something that Patron deserves, because the little buddy, he's been doing an incredibly good job. And there are many dogs like him who are doing amazing jobs around the entire country, helping to defuse bombs and keep the Ukrainian soldiers safe, and the civilians as well. And he is just one of the many dogs that the Ukrainians have been using for months on end now to make sure that they can help out in the war as much as possible. So make sure to help out all those dogs and pets in Ukraine, because I'm sure that all of them would do the same thing that Patron here is doing. And so with that, we're now going to move on from this Location Unknown News to the last two bits of Location Unknown News. Here in this video, we can actually see an ambush being conducted by the Ukrainians on Russian forces. And so here's that video. We can see the explosion go off. Unfortunately, it's turned into a slideshow. But nonetheless, slideshow or not, that explosion was pretty meaty. And that explosion, once again, wiped out loads of Russian vehicles, equipment, and personnel. And so it's, of course, an incredibly good thing to know, and it's an incredibly good thing to see that the Russians are not getting any ground without blood being shed. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see Easter has come to Ukraine. I did mention that earlier in the video, and I wanted to make sure to make a special note again to all of my Ukrainian viewers to wish y'all all a happy Easter, and I hope that y'all have had an incredibly safe day and a wonderful day, considering that this is such an important holiday here in the Western world and the Eastern world as well. And so with that, we've reached all of the news of the Location Unknowns, and before we move on to the Donbass and Mariupol, we're going to recognize some of the largest donors that we've had in between the question segments. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so we are currently sitting at $7.6 thousand on the fundraiser of the night. So that's incredible progress, as always. We've had several anonymous donors putting in donations here. Obviously, we don't know their names, so we can't recognize them, but everybody knows who they are. So thank you very much for your generosity. We do have a couple of large donations here that I want to recognize real quick. We have a $200 donation from Will Riley and a $100 donation from Raz Taz. And to everyone else who has put in a donation, we do recognize it and appreciate it. But as I mentioned earlier, we don't have enough time, unfortunately, to call out every single donation.
Actually,
so that being said,
real quick, if I can take over from you, I'm actually going to recognize some that have just come through real quick, just so that way we can let everyone know that we are going to try and recognize as much as we can. Eric Anderson sent in $20. I thank you so much for that. Anthony Stark sent in $5 Canadian. Thank you so much. Merlin and Company donated $20, and Kate Wolf donated $5. While we can't recognize everyone because we don't have a lot of time, I do want everyone to know that all of your donations are heavily appreciated, and we do love that every single one of y'all does as much as you can to support the wonderful causes that are currently operating inside of Ukraine and trying to make sure that everything is done as best as possible. And so I thank you all once again. And with that, we're going to move on to 3 questions from the chat. I will, of course, try and answer them really quick so we don't disrupt the news too much. But these 3 people will, of course, get good answers nonetheless, hopefully. And so with that, on to the first question.
Okay, and our first question is from Cherry Patterson, who says, "Do you think that Putin will soon withdraw when he sees it's a losing battle? I feel he's fighting a losing battle against the strong-willed Ukrainians."
I don't think he'll withdraw once he sees that it's a losing battle. He has, of course, saw it was a losing battle in the northern front as well as the eastern front, and now in the southern front, it doesn't appear to be a winning battle down there because the Russian offensive has largely stalled once again and is making no meaningful progress. So I don't think he will, and I hope that answers the question, at least in my opinion. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from Justin Apps, who says, "Enforcer, did you cover Russian news pundits talking about nuking New York?"
I did not, and I'm sure that that is something that they probably said. A lot of people who hate the United States always want to nuke New York. You know, look at the North Koreans; they dream about that every night. But nonetheless, I haven't. So I'm sorry to say that. But with that, we're going to move on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to move on to the news from the Southern Front.
And up next, we have a comment from Raphael Schweiss, who says, "Enforcer, do you think Russia will use the T-14 Armada? And if they use it, do you think it'll have any effect? God bless, and may God have mercy on Russia and Ukraine."
I thank you very much for joining this channel. And to answer that question, the Russians will not be using the T-14 Armada in any sense. Something that a lot of people believe is that the Russians haven't sent in their best stuff. And surprisingly enough, although their stuff is dated, it is the best stuff they have. The T-72B3s, the T-80 BVMs are the two best tanks in the Russian arsenal, along with the T-90A. All of those tanks we've seen being used heavily inside of Ukraine and being destroyed. And so if they were to step up further and try and bring in the T-14 Armada, there's only 14 of them, and due to sanctions, it seems like most of the technology that is used inside of them is now not able to be imported, and so the tanks simply cannot be built in any sizable numbers. And so with that, I hope that answers the question. And before we move on, I want to make sure that everyone knows that we are looking at the super chats and we are mentioning that there are people out there who are doing incredible things helping out the Humane Society International. First, we have Mike Brantley with $5, Clifford Wolf with $18. We have Anonymous with $10, Kyle Renninger for $100. Thank you so much. That's a massive donation, and that will help them out a whole load, and it gets us so much closer to the $10,000 goal for tonight. We have Carlin Evans for $15. Thank you so much. We have Eric Stefko for 20 Canadian dollars. We once again have Anonymous for 50. We have Anonymous for 20. We have Deviationist for 50 British pounds sterling. That's probably around $60. Thank you so much for the donation. And just to make sure I didn't miss anyone, it doesn't look like I've missed anyone so far. And so thank you all once again. Those are huge donations, and they will help us to get further in making sure that Humane Society International does get $10,000 of aid tonight to help them continue doing what they do. And with that, we have reached the end of this question segment, and we're now going to cover the news from the Southern Front and Mariupol as well, and then we will return to the questions and also trying to make sure that we reach that $10,000 goal, which I know the Leaf Spring Army can reach because nothing's been out of the reach of the Leaf Spring Army before. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the Southern Front news, starting in the area around Rybizhny, as today we've seen an Uragan firing towards the town of Limon. Limon, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a large railway depot here behind the lines near Severodonetsk and also up towards Izium. And I believe that the Russians are firing a large amount of missiles towards that town because that is a logistical hub for the Ukrainians, and they're trying to make sure that the Ukrainian logistics are as screwed up as theirs. And so here's the video of that Uragan firing in that direction. And so with that, that's the end of that video. Of course, very self-explanatory. What was interesting to me is that we only saw one Uragan. Usually we see them operating in some kind of battery, but nonetheless, that was only one. And so I don't know if that was some kind of rigged propaganda video or what, but that was kind of a little unusual to see. Anyways, we're now going to move on into the Luhansk area of the Donbass, where we can see the Russians taking Ukrainian positions today. It seems that the Russians had to fight tooth and nail to take this small amount of ground, but nonetheless, they did take it, and we can see that they have gathered some things of the Ukrainians that shows that they were once there. Of course, you can see the in-law in this part of the footage, and so I'm going to start it off. Of course, I would be nose blind to say that the Russians don't have small successes here and there, and so this is one of these rare instances where the Russians have managed to actually do something that isn't purely incompetent, and they've actually taken a small amount of ground. And so with that, here's the video.
Стой, там танки. Смотри, наши напорник пошли. Прикрываем наших. Бля, хоть захватили это говно, которое могло бы ебашить.
We can see the in-law here.
Ебаный в рот. Оба, прилет.
We can, of course, still hear an explosion rock out in the distance. This appears to be some kind of Ukrainian identification card that they found. But nonetheless, this is a Ukrainian location that has been taken by the Russians, but this is, of course, an incredibly rare instance because this is the first time we've seen a video of this kind during 5 days of an offensive. And considering that we've only seen one video like this over 5 days where the Russians should have been taking ground, tells you how poorly it's really going for them. And so with that, that's the end of this video. We will, of course, cover, before we move on to the questions again, the situation here in the South, and I'm going to weigh in on what I think will be happening here in the future. But with that, we're now going to move further down the Luhansk region, where we can see the Russians once again attacking Ukrainian positions in the Donbass, and it doesn't really look like, from the drone footage, they're having a lot of progress because we don't really see the Russian infantry moving up or in any kind of firefight. This appears to be some kind of behind-the-lines attack. Of course, it has copyrighted music in it. But nonetheless, we can see the Ukrainian infantry running as the fire comes pouring in, most likely trying to get to safer positions. We can now see more explosions. We can see an explosion there on the tree line. I'm not really sure how much damage is being inflicted upon this Ukrainian infantry group, but hopefully it's a small amount because they don't actually show that in this video. And so with that, that is the end of that video. There's not really much to say there. The video is what it is. But with that, we're now going to move further on down the Donbass towards the Donetsk area, where we've seen today the DPR using ancient howitzers. They're using D-20 howitzers, which are a 155mm artillery piece, and these guns were designed in the 40s. So this tells you that they're an incredibly ancient artillery piece, and we can, of course, see the DPR using them with glee and acting like they're the next best thing.
Пушка гаубица Д-20 с арсеналом из
Now we've got a guy, of course, talking about how great the D-20 is, probably.
в 1945 году, сразу после окончания Второй мировой войны. Но за столько десятилетий модификация этих орудий не потеряла своей огневой силы и по-прежнему эффективно справляется со своими задачами. Осколочно-фугасные снаряды...
Now I'm going to pause this video and I'm going to say something here. While the Russians always look like they're performing their jobs with the artillery incredibly well, I saw a video a while ago. It was NSFW, so I could not show it on stream. It was too graphic. But it was the Russians grabbing artillery shells out of the back of a truck and flinging them down a hill. These village idiots were taking live ammunition and throwing it down a hill. So you can assume what happened. It all exploded. It blew up the SPG it was near, and it killed everyone around except for the cameraman, apparently. So that gives you an idea of how competent the Russians are, even with their training around artillery pieces, because they were treating the live rounds that they were throwing down this hill like some kind of just junk. So with that, I'm going to let the video play, and keep that in mind when you watch these DPR troops trying to act like they know how to operate artillery.
Но военные говорят, при особом подходе можно выжать и все 19-20. Главное,
we now see them firing another salvo.
И сноровку.
Also, by the way, I have to note this. This is obviously a shush helmet. Let me pull that up real quick. All right, just to give you a perspective of how backwards these people are. So let me pull up the images and get a side shot of the shush helmet. If I can. Come on. There we go. You see that distinctive shape? That helmet has the exact same shape. That is not a modern Russian helmet. That is a shush helmet that they put new camouflage covering over to make it look like it's new. So this, once again, is trying to fall into that propaganda where they're trying to make the DPR look like it has some new stuff in it by covering old-fashioned stuff with new camo. But this helmet here was a Soviet-era Cold War helmet that has been out of service for decades in most countries that are now former Soviet countries. So that tells you how backwards technologically the DPR is in every direction, is that they're having to disguise the shush helmets and try and make them look like modern helmets. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
Батарея пушек под Донецком сейчас работает,
So now
пожалуй,
you
по
see them
самой
giving another
сложной
interview.
задаче — скоплению сил противоположной стороны в так называемом котле, укрепрайонах,
Look
которые
how
8
slow
лет
that artillery crew was. Oh my god, that was
скоплению
slow.
сил противоположной стороны в так
Look at
называемом
that.
котле, укрепрайонах, которые 8 лет отливались в бетоне. И именно такой, как говорят, артой, больше
They're going to
всего
get
шансов
themselves killed
выковырять,
operating that
пусть и
slow.
нечасто
I'm not
в эфире
complaining
глагол,
about
но
that. The
весьма
Ukrainians will
уместный.
make quick
Так
work
вот,
of them.
выковырять все то, что
But
укрывается в
gosh, how
глубине
stupid they gotta
крепости.
be.
Уже мста идет, она уже более модифицирована. Это орудие такое же наподобие, как и более эффективности, потому что у него больше пневматики, соответственно.
Now we can see this old pensioner. He actually has the modern helmet under his Ratnik camo gear. You can see that clearly. This is the only guy probably in the whole unit that's got a modern helmet. And that does once again show that they're trying to put a propaganda spin on things, because this guy's got the same camo net on his helmet that the other guy had, but you can obviously tell that one of them was a shush helmet, and I think this is a 6B43 helmet, if I'm correct, although I don't know the exact names of everything. But nonetheless, you can get the idea that they are trying to make this unit look a lot more modern than they are. But this guy's got almost entirely Ratnik gear, which is a modern camo design.
400 минимальная дальность. Самое сложное этого сама масса снаряда, только снарядный очень должен быть подготовленный физически, потому что вес снаряда до 46 килограмм самого выстрела.
2 минуты остается до первых залпов. Вот там, с одной стороны, сейчас находятся снаряды, которые первыми
Now,
отправляют
here's
в
the thing.
орудие,
Ukrainian
потом
artillery would have been
проталкивают
sitting
его,
here.
в общем,
Well, not
продвигают
sitting here. They would have
по
set up,
стволу.
fired, and already been
Потом
moved by this
отправляется
point.
туда же
But these
следом
guys are sitting
под
around
него
acting like it's a
заряд.
picnic and not understanding that there will be counter battery fire coming in and
Орудие
destroying this
после этого
unit if
производится
they sit
выстрел.
around like this for this
Уже
long
не 2
all the
минуты
time.
осталось, уже минуты полторы, так что пора отойти, потому что будет громко.
So now we can see them firing again.
3 расчета сейчас отправили первую партию снарядов. Прям слышно, как летят далеко, и скорость, конечно, фантастическая. Ну, да.
Now
Здесь
this guy's
важно
getting something through his
приоткрыть немного рот,
earpiece.
потому что можно остаться вообще без барабанных перепонок.
Look how slow they are. Okay, listen, I have no military experience, but the thing is that you can obviously tell this is slow as Christmas back here. If this was the American artillery unit, which I've watched plenty of videos on, they would have had this gun reloaded by this point. And right now, they're still waiting for this guy, apparently, to clear the breach on this gun. These people have to be the slowest artillery unit on Earth. I mean, like, hell, in the reenacting world, we're able to load a black powder cannon quicker than that and fire it than these people. And that tells you a lot, okay? Because we don't do that as a full-time thing. That's a hobby. And I've seen the guy in my group load a cannon, a black powder cannon from the 1800s quicker than these clowns can load a modern cannon that pretty much you just shove the shell and the charge in and then fire it. This is just ridiculous.
Эффектное зрелище.
So look, they're trying to do it a little bit quickly here, but they're still going slow as Christmas. You can see this guy wearing a camouflage shush helmet. They're still trying to make them look a little modern, but you can tell that these people are like some kind of ragtag homegrown force that definitely shouldn't be
Реальная
near a
боевая
front.
работа такова, что от волн в сторону относит даже самую продвинутую птицу. Дрон, камера вздрагивает с каждым отлетом, и только артиллеристы под орудием сохраняют рабочее военное спокойствие. Когда война закончится?
У меня пенсия уже. Я до этого в милиции отработал 20 лет. Поэтому...
I don't know who this guy is supposed to be.
семья,
Like
дом,
this guy looks like you know, you remember Hogan's Heroes, the guy who goes, "I know nothing." This guy looks like that guy without the mustache. But anyways, we're gonna let the video continue.
Восстанавливать республику надо. Дома сидеть не будем. Не привыкли.
This has got to be the artillery unit that the DPR got from Wish.com because these people are awful.
Вообще наблюдать даже пусть и в стороне, но вживую за тем, как работают расчеты подразделений артиллерии, ни с чем не сравнимые ощущения. Командир батареи, координаты, сигнальный флаг и команда, орудие, огонь. Иногда кажется, что здесь механика четче швейцарских часов. Оно и понятно. На кону не только боевые задачи, но и жизни людей.
Волновахи были. Сейчас Маринка, Красногоровка, Авдеевка.
Here we can see this guy. Look at this. Jesus. He's got some, I think that's a Ratnik camo. I can't really tell. It looks honestly a little bit brighter than the normal Ratnik. Then he's got a whole other camouflage pattern on under that, and then his vest is an entirely different camouflage pattern. This guy's wearing 3 eras of uniform, all on the same body. If that's not scraping the barrel for supplies, I don't know what is.
Расчет подготовленный, с боевым духом. В расчете командир расчета, наводчик, заряжающий, 2 снарядных, 2 зарядных и водитель.
Армия России при поддержке сил Донецка
Now you see them standing around acting like the artillery pieces are tourist attractions.
контроль над Донбассом и Южной Украиной, обеспечив...
Look, Mr. Multicam over here, he doesn't even know if he should walk near the artillery piece. You can see him timidly start walking towards it, and then he turns around with the body language of, am I supposed to walk over here? And then he keeps going like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to walk over here. Watch that.
Во время
Like,
второй
take
фазы
good note of that.
спецоперации планируют установить
Look,
полный
he's like, should I
контроль
walk?
над
Oh, okay.
Донбассом и Южной Украиной.
Golly,
обеспечив
man, these
коридор в
people do
Крым.
not
Об этом
make a good
заявил
impression at
замком
all.
войсками Центрального
Very bad for
военного
propaganda.
округа
If you
Российской
just
Федерации.
look at their
На самом
body
Донбассе
language, it's
вторые
off.
сутки набирает темпы наступления на так называемый котел под Донецком. Хотя и осторожно, идет речь о пасхальном перемирии.
6-8 минут поработали расчеты. Дымовая завеса, конечно, будь здоров, здесь на склоне.
So with that, it pretty much just rounds out with this guy talking. It's pointless. It's some kind of propaganda speech. So with that, we're now going to end that bit of news, and we're going to cut the crapping on the DPR artillery. We know it's all very poor and very bad, and so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, where we see the DPR using a grenade launcher as a form of smaller artillery. I think they do this to try and supplement the small-sized mortars that most infantry units have. Well, not really most infantry units. Sometimes they have them. Sometimes these mortars can be around 40 millimeters in size to around 61 millimeters, or maybe even 81. But here we can see them using a 40 millimeter grenade launcher, kind of like how one would use a mortar. Oh my! I just heard the copyrighted music. I'm sorry. I gotta mute that. So anyways, we can now see them trying to reload the grenade launcher. Apparently, from the caption on this video, they're getting adjustments of fire, adjustment of fire input from a drone operator. So he's flying a little, probably like DJI drone over the battlefield, and he's telling them where to adjust their fire. Hey, and congratulations, everyone. We just reached 9,000 on the fundraiser. Good job, everyone. We're doing incredibly well. We can see the trenches that the grenade launcher was apparently firing at. Also, a quick correction. Apparently, that grenade launcher in particular uses 30 mil shells instead of 40 millimeter. Want to make sure that that correction is made. We can now see the Russian soldiers apparently using the drone sitting inside of this, what appears to be some kind of a farm animal house, a shed, if you would like to call it, and they're trying to operate the drone from there. We now see the explosions rocking around the building that Ukrainian forces are supposedly in. What's interesting to me is that that grenade launcher has a much higher fire rate than the fire we're seeing coming in on this video. Because the grenade launcher's firing rate was dum, 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 and the artillery blasts landing on the ground are like boom, boom. And so it's a totally different rate of fire. I think they've actually tried to mesh two videos together and try and make them make sense, but the timing of the rounds landing isn't on point with the rate of fire of the grenade launcher. So let me know in the chat if y'all saw that and agree with me as well, because I think that's something important to note if I'm not just seeing things here. And so with that, we're now going to move on from the Donetsk area, and we're now going to go to Mariupol. And then we're going to revisit the condition of the front down here in general. Starting off on the outskirts of Mariupol, we have seen today proof that Russian tanks are leaving Mariupol, as these tanks were sighted moving down the roads outside of Mariupol away from it, supposedly to other areas in the Donbass. As we can see there, that was a T-64BV. We can now see another T-64. Well, that may actually be a T-80BV. I'm not entirely sure. That appeared to be some kind of BTR. Another BTR. And now we can see this guy giving a description of what's going on, but unfortunately I had to mute it because it did have copyrighted music in it. And so with that, we do know that Russian forces are moving out of the Mariupol area. We just don't know by how much, because we don't actually have any official numbers. We were told most of them would be withdrawing, but that doesn't give us a percentage or a figure, and it looks like we haven't had any public information yet to tell us how many there are. And how many have left. And so with that, we're now going to go to the Azovstal itself, where we've gotten a little bit of news today. Not a lot, but a little, which is showing us that the Chechens and the DPR are continuing to fight around the Azovstal, although it may not be as fierce as it once was a couple of days ago. And so with that, we're going to start off by showing the DPR soldiers using an RPO in Mariupol.
Емеля нас собирает. Рысь. На максималку ставь, 270. Понял куда? Под этот самый. На максималку тут выставляй. На максимум вверх.
So we can see here that they apparently are getting ready to use the RPO.
Ну, и, короче, между этими хатками. Ну, цель берешь, мушку под верх столба.
We can also see that they have a ladder on the wall from a child's playground. They blurred out his face, but now it looks like he is aiming over the wall. Is he really going to try and shoot that low over the wall?
Ну что, Галина, сейчас за Донбасс или за Россию?
За Донбасс.
За Донбасс? Давай.
А Россия нам поможет.
А Россия нам поможет.
So now he's going to climb up the kiddie ladder over the wall.
Давай навесом.
Notice how there's no firefight going on in this area. The guy is just acting like this is a day at the range. There's no sound except for the distant boom of one artillery shell, and there's no firefight in the area at all. So what are they shooting at? You know, and this, once again, is the typical Russian video where we don't actually see that a firefight's going on like we see in Ukrainian videos, and it's just some guy shooting an RPO in the middle of Mariupol for no other reason than to just do it.
Хорош.
So there it goes. He fired it.
Все, отходи. Посмотрим, что там.
And look, he finally got to fire the RPO. I'm sure it wasn't at anything important or at anything at all. It was probably at an abandoned building. So I'm sure that he did a lot of help in making sure that the Russians will definitely teach the Azovstal who's in charge. And I say that sarcastically. So with that, we're now going to move on from that bit of news to the next bit of news from Mariupol, where we can see a DPR soldier firing another rocket. So here's that video. Once again, we can see Mr. Camo Man here, Mr. Multicam. We have one kind of camo as his actual tunic or shirt, if you'd like to call it, jacket. We then have another different camo as his vest, and then he's wearing a black airsoft helmet. I'm going to call that an airsoft helmet because I'm sure that they got that from wish.com, and that thing is probably $40 and made entirely of plastic. So with that, here's the video. But we can actually see this guy using his airsoft helmet well, because he's actually got a headset on, which makes it reasonably worth using. So with that, now I'm going to continue the video.
Рот откройте пошире, и все. И порядок. Сзади не стойте, ебать.
I would like to, I want to make sure to give out a huge shout out, and I don't want this taken seriously, okay, because I don't want them think, I don't want anything coming out of this, but I would like to give a shout out to Goodwill for giving the Russians their clothes, because you can obviously tell that these people were apparently living on the streets before they came out here to war, because all these clothes look like hand-me-downs and they're also not even matching. So once again, thanks to Goodwill for that. So now we can see him prepping to fire. Nothing. There is, of course, isn't the sound of a firefight around. And he finally fires it after all that time of prepping. And now they act like he's really done something in the usual Russian fashion. So, of course, interesting to see that the Goodwill men, that's what I'm going to call them from now on. I'm going to call the DPR forces and the LPR forces the Goodwill men. The Goodwill men are doing an incredibly great job at doing a terrible job at propaganda making. And so with that, that's the end of that video. Also, I'd like to make note of the Morris Dancer little handkerchief tie down there. By the way, just so everyone knows what I'm talking about when I say Morris Dancer, here's a Morris Dancer. So that way, y'all can get a great idea of what I'm saying whenever I talk about Morris Dancers. You gotta say that the little the little leg bands they tie around their calves look a lot like the little bells that jingle off of the legs of the Morris dancers in England. So with that, that is the end of that video, and I'm not going to joke on them anymore, or else the Russians will send over someone to poison me. And, you know, I don't really care, but nonetheless, I don't really want to get poisoned yet. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from around Mariupol, where we can see that the Chechens are, in fact, still fighting around there, as we can see in this video. So we can hear a little bit of a firefight there, but of course they start playing the typical Chechen music. We can see this guy, here's a question. I'm going to run a poll on this real quick. Should we include, should we call the Chechens Goodwill men as well? Yes or no? I think I misspelled as well, but y'all will get the picture. Because these guys are in terrible shape as well with their camouflage and their equipment. We can see here Ratnik camo, and then some other kind of multicam, and then some other kind of camo that they're wearing under all that. So these guys look like Goodwill men too. So we can see a Chechen in there in the building. He's sitting down like he's at a school presentation, firing through the window. So apparently a lot of y'all do not want to call the Chechens Goodwill men. So I think that'll be kept relegated to the DPR and LPR, and we're just going to make sure that they're still called the TikTok superstars. We can see one of them being carried away. The Chechens are still trying to make this a really hype and happy TikTok video, but we could see a glimpse there of what was actually going on, which was pure chaos, and they're hardly in a firefight. So with that, they're trying to make it look good, but of course that was blurred out. They're trying to make it look like they did something, but I'm sure that's actually just one of theirs because they blurred it out so heavily. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news from the Mariupol area, where we can see that the Azov BTR-4 that we saw at the very beginning of the Battle of Mariupol, flying around the streets like it was Battlefield 4 and lighting up enemy vehicles, has never died, and we saw another video come out of the Azov BTR striking again at Russian forces. And so let's watch this video real quick, because it is, in usual fashion, crazy like all the other ones.
лівіше, ближче, от за дорогою сразу тип стріляє. Бачу.
So we can see that they gave it to that infantry unit. They tore into him. And I can't believe that the Azov's BTR-4 is still running. I don't know if this is the same one or not, but that's crazy to me to think that they actually still have operating armored vehicles. And so with that, we could see a little bit in the glimpse of the glass, the guy behind the gun. And, you know, that guy at this point, if he's still the same guy who was operating the gun on the original BTR-4 videos from the Azov, this guy is a Terminator, pretty much. He's been going through the Russian lines and ripping apart BMPs, T-72s, and now infantry. So he's gotten a little bit of everything under his belt, and I've got to say, this guy is doing one hell of a job in the defense of Mariupol. And so since we've covered all of the news now, let's talk about the strategic situation of the Ukrainians here in the south. We're not going to talk about the Kharkiv area or anywhere down towards Izium. We're going to talk about from Izium to Kherson. What is their situation? Right now, the Russians are holding on to Kherson. It seems like they're holding on to it pretty well, and so I don't think that part of the front will change. So with that out of the way, we're now going to move entirely over here. First off, we do know that the Russians are launching an offensive and trying to go down the second corridor that's highlighted as yellow, which is the largest encirclement that the Russians could feasibly do. It's, of course, the easiest one, and so it does make sense that they would go for this first. So with that in mind, we know that they're going down the P-79 and the M03 towards Slavyansk. So I'm going to highlight this again, and I'm going to kind of say what the Russians are probably doing. So they're trying to head down Slavyansk in this direction. We don't know of any kind of southern push from Svitlodarsk at this moment, but, oh man, undo. Come on. We'll just put that down as line 52 because it won't be here for long. We'll highlight it as a purplish color. Nah, yeah, we'll do that color. So they're heading down that direction, but we also know at this point that there is another little Russian push that is heading towards the direction of Hrushchevka. Unfortunately, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, but they are also trying to head in this direction as well, from what we can tell. So we're going to mark that up, color it in. There we go. That's another line. These two lines represent what we know as the heaviest pushes in this current Russian offensive that is ongoing. So with this in mind, here's how the Ukrainians are probably viewing the situation, or here's how they should view it. The Russians are attempting to try and tighten the area of operation in here. The whole reason behind this, because we don't really know of any push coming from the south in the same direction towards Slavyansk, is that they may just be making it seem that this bulge here is no longer attainable, because the Russians could try and push from Kamina and also Slavyansk towards Liman, which is a large railroad depot in the region, and this could cut off this entire area and create a sizable pocket. This isn't actually the original pocket that we're going for, or this one around Severodonetsk. It appears that they may be trying to make a third pocket here out of the area from Borova to Liman. So with that in mind, I think that we can get the good idea that it looks like the Russians are going to try and cut up this area into multiple segments, because we do know that right now the Russians are still trying to push through Rubizhny and probably circle around Lysychansk and create a pocket there. So it looks like they're actually trying to not make one large pocket, they're trying to cut this thing up into about 3 different pockets and take them all on one at a time and wipe them out so that way they can slowly gain the ground. That seems pretty reasonable to me, and I think that's probably what they're going for. Of course, I don't want to weigh in on what the Ukrainians will be doing, because usually somehow I'm able to get most things right that I say, although not everything's right. Some of it is wrong, and I will admit that. But usually I get most things right, and so I don't want to sit there and start saying what I think the Ukrainians are going to start doing, because if I got that right, then if there's any Russians watching, they get a pretty good idea of what I'm thinking, and if they haven't thought about it, that's giving them new ideas. And so with that, that's generally the large idea of what's going on most fronts. I don't think anything's going to happen near Donetsk. It looks honestly like the Donetsk Republic and the Russian forces that are there are currently just fighting for control of the towns on the border in between the two, like Marinka, Volnovakha, and also up here in Luhansk region of Popasna. And so with that, we have reached the end of the news for tonight and also the end of my analysis for the day. So I thank you all very much for watching. Of course, we still do have the fundraiser going, and I'm about to ask Matthew to make public our largest donors in between the last question segment and now. And we're also going to answer some questions and make sure that we reach that $10,000 goal. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so we're currently sitting at $9.4 thousand on our fundraiser. So we have just about $600 to go until we reach our goal. So a couple of our top donors here, we have a $120 donation from Zeta Lane. We have a $100 donation from Dad Good, Gina Gonzalez, Can Kitty. Thank you very much all for your donations. Up next, we have a $60 donation from Sebastian Ellinghaus. And we have several $50 donations here. We have one from Tess 105, Yoli H, Irvin, Andy Blank, and Jason Smith. So thank you very much to all of you, and to everybody else who put in smaller donations. Thank you as well. Everything adds up and helps us to reach our goal.
And I thank you all so much for the support. And I also like to make a special thanks to Zeta Lane, because not only is she a large supporter of this channel and ensures that we can keep on doing what we're doing here, but she is also the one who continues to come through on the Sunday fundraisers and drop in large amounts as well. And so with that, I thank you so much for supporting the channel and the Ukrainian cause as well. And with that, once again, I would like to thank all of the donors tonight on this night's fundraiser. We have now reached $9.5 thousand on tonight's stream. So once again, great job, everyone. If we can reach the last $500, we will have reached the $10,000 goal for the night. I know the Leaf Spring Army can do it. It looks like a whole bunch of people are coming in right now. Alan sending in $10 and Red Queen 0324 sending in $100. I thank you all so much. And it looks like, honestly, we will be reaching the $10,000 goal right here, right now. Looks like the Leaf Spring Army is springing into action, and we're going to make sure to reach that goal and make sure that we can save at least some dogs from the terrible war in Ukraine, as well as the cats. And so with that, on to the questions while the Leaf Spring Army does what it does best, which is win.
And real quick, I want to recognize a couple more donations. We have a $100 donation from B. Baldy, a $20 donation from Kim Hunter, and we have a $50 donation from Vern. And let me make sure I didn't miss anybody here. And a $20 donation from Cesar E. Lopez III, or second, actually. Excuse me. And also a $50 donation from BC Skyman. We just reached $10,000.
Let's
It looks
go!
like Loco Poco 24 sent us over the mark, along with Ed A. So thank you very much. We have now reached our goal.
Great job, everyone. We've reached the $10,000 goal. And the question is, before we reach the end of this question segment, do you think we can reach $11,000? I don't know if it's possible, but the Leaf Spring Army, once again, has done impossible things the entire time that we've run this stream from day one. And so I thank you all so much. We have reached the goal for tonight's fundraiser, and hopefully we can reach $11,000 as well. And so I thank you all once again. This type of support's massive, and I want to make sure to personally recognize some of y'all that have come in beyond us reaching the goal. I would like to recognize Mr. Jim. You donated $20. Thank you so much. I'd also like to recognize an anonymous donation of 50 New Zealand dollars. Thank you once again. Makara with $20. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if that's the first time you've donated. Hopefully it's not the last time you donated on a Sunday fundraiser. Moving on from that, we've got Anonymous for $20. We got Scott for $50. Matty Dunn for $20. Katsio, let me make sure I follow that one. Katsio for $5. And I don't think any more have come in yet, but I thank you all so much. Y'all are great people, and y'all are continuing to help great things happen in Ukraine and making sure that there is a lot of help that gets its way there. Of course, the entire war in Ukraine doesn't revolve around this channel's fundraisers alone. There are loads of people out there who are running fundraisers all the time, and to all of those people, I have to say to them, thank you so much, because they, once again, along with us and the Leaf Spring Army, help to make sure that Ukraine keeps on functioning and that they don't have to tie up as much resources doing things behind the lines themselves, and that they can focus their resources on the defense of their country. And so thank you all once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the questions.
And first up, we have a question from Cranberry 6 Point, who says, Enforcer, the wife wants to know if there's any news about the quote-unquote murder/suicides of the two Russian oligarchs and their families. One was in Spain and the other in Russia. One was Gazprom.
Sadly, I do not have any information about the deaths of oligarchs. Usually I focus on almost entirely frontline news and news pertaining to the support or the condemnation of Ukraine. So if there's anything inside of Russia that's condemning Ukraine, I cover that. And if there's anything in the West that supports Ukraine, like the election of Macron and also the protest here in the United States, I cover international things like that. But I don't really get into the oligarch stuff all too much because it's kind of a sideshow in this war. But I do thank you so much for the question, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to plead ignorance and say I really can't answer that due to a lack of information on my end. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a comment from the Enforcer fan who says, Enforcer, could you hold a poll about whether or not the USA should lead NATO alliance into this conflict, or just do a no-fly zone, or just keep sending aid to Ukraine?
Let's run a poll on that real quick, actually. What should the U.S. do? Let's see. The first one will be lead NATO into the conflict. Establish a no-fly zone. Next option. Let's see. What was there any other options he provided rather than those two?
The third option was keep sending aid to Ukraine.
Keep sending aid to Ukraine. So now we got all of those options up. We're going to run the poll real quick and see what everyone thinks. So with that, I hope that answers your question and also follows through on it in a bit. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a comment from Robert Heath, who says, Enforcer, what is the deal with the Romanian MiG-21 Lancers? That is a really old design. Does this aircraft have anything to bring to the table?
I do have to agree that it is an incredibly old design, and I'm not really sure if it does have anything to bring to the table anymore. We know in the Iran-Iraq war that aircraft that had a slight advantage over the MiG-21s, like for example the Iraqi MiG-21s, got shot down by the F-14s, and the MiG-21s were so technologically hindered back then that they actually thought that the MiG-21s in the Iraqi inventory were just blowing up just due to engine problems or something like that. So the Iraqis actually grounded their MiG-21 force for a long while trying to figure out what was the problem mechanically with their MiGs and what was causing them to internally combust on site. And as time went on, they actually found out that it was the Iranian F-14s that were shooting them down from over the horizon. So if you put that into historical context of the Iran-Iraq war, I'm not really sure if they would be beneficial in that regard, but there is, of course, certain ways that you can always use aircraft to make them somewhat useful in some degree. So I'm not going to entirely rule them out, but once again, they are heavily outclassed in the modern world. It is a design from the 1960s. And so with that, I hope I've answered that question pretty well, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And if anybody has any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat using @TheEnforcer, and we will see if we can get to them all before the stream ends tonight. Up next, we have a question from BPM, who says, Enforcer, I've said it before that NATO needs to treat Russia like the Romans treated Carthage after the Third Punic War.
Can you say that one more time real quick?
They said, I've said it before that NATO needs to treat Russia like the Romans treated Carthage after the Third Punic War.
I believe, if I'm correct, the Third Punic War was when Russia went down to Carthage and salted the land so that way it couldn't grow crops anymore. And if you're saying that, I can't really disagree, but I don't really entirely agree with that because while the Russian government, the army, and it seems like the people at this point are pretty evil, I don't really want to wish too bad of things upon them, because at the same time, if I say that, then that means I would have to backtrack and say in World War II, we should have gone through Germany and treated them like Carthage in the Third Punic Wars, which I think the actual response after World War II and how we treated Germany was pretty appropriate considering the circumstances. But I thank you very much for the question, and I hope I've answered it a pretty good way, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a comment from Douglas Arnold, who says, Enforcer, do you think there's any hope for the children and families in the Azovstal plant?
I do think that there is hope for them as long as the Russians do not conduct another offensive on the plant. The plant is, of course, in a precarious position, and so the fact that it may be under siege once more and the Russians may begin another offensive on it in the future does put the question of the safety of the defenders and the citizens hiding inside of Mariupol at risk. If the Azovstal managed to get destroyed, these citizens would be under the direct control of the Russian Federation, and who knows what would happen to them beyond that. They could be executed, they could be deported into Russia, who knows, but nonetheless, I do think that it would be a terrible situation for the Azovstal to fall to the Russians, and hopefully the Ukrainians, the Azov and the 36th Infantry Brigade that is currently in there can manage to put up such a rugged resistance and such a staunch one that the Russians never actually consider a serious capture attempt of the Azovstal itself. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a comment from CT, who says, Enforcer, have you seen the Ukraine has threatened to blow up the Kursk bridge to Crimea? Have you seen Kaliningrad is going to hold a referendum on moving away from the Russian Federation?
Actually, the little referendum was fake. That wasn't real. That was something that the Ukrainians were trying to highlight to show how polls and elections can be faked by some kind of like authoritarian power like the Russians, because they put that out and everyone believed it immediately, much like everyone believes the Russian polls about how much support there is for the war inside of Russia and such. But nonetheless, to answer the other part of that question, yes, I have heard that the Ukrainians have been eyeballing the Crimean bridge, and I do think that they are trying to come up with a plan on how to destroy it. If they can, it's of course going to be a huge logistical hindrance to the Russians that are having to be supplied through the Crimean area, specifically across the Crimean bridge. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Blue Hammer, who says, Enforcer, why would they give up any territory just to have Russia regroup, then attack again later on, and eventually take all of the country? They need to take back Donetsk and all that territory first.
Could you read that question back to me, because I think I kind of like misunderstood it there for a second.
He said, Enforcer, why would they give up any territory just to have Russia regroup and then attack later on and eventually take all of the country? They need to take back the Donetsk and all that territory first.
I'm not really sure how to understand that question for some reason. I don't know if you're saying that they shouldn't give up any land. They're really not. And I think that may be talking about how I answered a question before about the Russians keeping the land they have right now. But unfortunately, I don't really know how to respond to that question. So with that, I've actually seen a question here in the comments before we move on to the next one from Matthew that I'd like to answer from Bearcat, who says, at the Enforcer, please tell us the total raised from all fundraisers thus far. Thank you. Well, the answer, and I'm so proud to say it, is $130,000 as of tonight's fundraiser. Before tonight's figure, it was $120,000, and now we've reached $130,000 in total raised for support in Ukraine. This, of course, has gone to multiple nonprofits. We've had the American Red Cross. We've had Doctors Without Borders twice on stream. We've had Razom for Ukraine. We've also had the Humane Society International, which is tonight's. And then I believe we've had Mercy Corps and UNICEF as well. So we've done about 6 different nonprofit organizations, and all of them have gotten huge amounts of support from this community. And I want to thank you all once again, because without y'all, this wouldn't be possible. And so thank you all once again, and I hope that does answer your question and also make this community so much prouder of being all members of the Leaf Spring Army. And so with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a comment from Havlin Turf, who says, Enforcer, when the Ukraine gets the Excalibur 155 rounds, it's going to be a game changer. It's like a sniper with a 70-click range.
Oh, certainly. I do know about the Excalibur round. Now, that's something I actually do remember incredibly well, because every time the recruiters came through my school, I would ask them always, if they were from the Marine Corps, about the Excalibur round. So the Excalibur, for anyone who doesn't know, is a smart shell that is launched usually, well, always, because I believe it's the only artillery piece that can fire it, is a 155 millimeter M777 howitzer, and the round actually can guide itself into the target. So it's not like the usual artillery shell that has a large amount of spread and it could fall in any given radius. This shell will actually shoot up, and then it will guide itself straight into the target, I believe with some kind of GPS locationing or something similar to that. But I do thank you very much for sharing that with everyone, because I kind of like buried that in the back of my head, but of course it is a round that the M777 howitzer can use and will probably be used incredibly effectively by the artillery-loving Ukrainians. And so I thank you so much for that. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a comment from Woody Stems, who says, Enforcer, how long does it take to train a Russian tank crew, basic versus high tech?
Can you say that one more time? Because I just saw a person with a a donation in the chat that had a crazy name. But could you reread that one?
So he says, Enforcer, how long does it take to train a Russian tank crew, basic versus high tech?
Let's pull that up. How long does it take for a Russian tank crew to train? How long does it take to train a tank crew? For an M1 crew on an M1 Abrams, it takes 22 weeks. Golly. It doesn't tell us for Russia though. So if we're to say that Russia has the same training cycle as the United States, it takes 22 weeks for an average Russian tank crew to train onto their tanks. And of course, that's using the American figure. So going off of that, you can get the idea that it's going to take a very long time to replace a tank crew because apparently it has a lot of training involved. So I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a comment from Robert Smith, who says, Enforcer, there has been an update on estimated Russian, or instead he's asking, has there been an update on estimated Russian casualties, troops, and equipment from the Ukrainians? I love the hard work from yourself and Matt.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And let's see how, Russian casualties so far. Let's see if we can get one from the Kyiv Independent from today. Let's see. I go with the Kyiv Independence number because it seems pretty accurate considering that they're over there and they haven't been wrong so far. Actually, the Russians came out at one point when everyone's saying that's a propaganda number, and they confirmed the number almost to the dot. So this is from 5 days ago. Let's let it access to Kyiv. So this is from April 20th, but at that point, the Russians had lost 21,000 troops, 171 planes, 150 helicopters, 815 tanks, 391 artillery pieces, 2,087 armored personnel carriers, 4 mobile short-range ballistic missile systems, 136 MLRSs, 8 boats, including the flagship Moskva, 1,504 vehicles, 76 fuel tanks, 165 drones, 67 anti-aircraft devices, and 27 special equipment vehicles. So, in short, an incredibly high amount. And we know that this amount is actually higher than the average of the British losses every single day over the course of World War II. So at this rate, I don't think they'll be able to keep this up much longer. But I hope that answers your question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a comment from Hoodoo, Texas, who says, I wonder if we will see technical pickup trucks after the ground dries. I'd love to see a Toyota take out a T-72.
Well, honestly, I wouldn't doubt it because we can see that the Ukrainians are doing a lot of improvising on their side. We can see that they're now using an ATV to carry around an Atgm. So I think that we may actually start seeing those Toyota Hiluxes making their appearance in Ukraine and hopefully being used incredibly well. And so I hope I've addressed that a little bit. And with that, we're actually going to answer about 3 more comments and questions from the chat, and then we're going to round the stream out for the night. And also, once again, to remind everyone who's still here, I will not be streaming tomorrow. Tomorrow is a Monday, and of course, the streaming will resume on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And the show will start 10 minutes after the stream begins. And so with that, on to the next question.
And up next, we have a comment from James Lynn, who says, Enforcer, I worked for Textron Off-Road for a while and developed prototypes of UTVs for airborne special ops use. They're great little vehicles, just limited by range and payload.
Well, that's incredibly interesting to know. Let's pull up UTV. For some reason, I call these things carts or ATVs. I've never actually heard of these being called UTVs, but I think it may just be out of the ATV/UTV loop. Nonetheless, I do thank you very much for sharing that information with us, and also that was a really cool thing that you did. I actually have a friend who helped, I believe, if I remember his story correctly, helped train astronauts who were going up on the Hubble telescope repair mission on repairing the space telescope, which is wild because he's actually the guy who owns the cannon in my reenacting group. But nonetheless, a really interesting story, kind of on the line of that one. And so I thank you very much for sharing it, and that was pretty neat. And I thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And Enforcer, I think several people are asking if you would report the results of the poll.
Ah, yes, of course. So we'll answer that right now. As of right now, we have 1,300 votes in. This poll was put up 13 minutes ago. 23% of y'all should say that the U.S. should lead NATO into the conflict. 17% of y'all say that the U.S. should establish a no-fly zone. And now it's 59% of y'all say that we should keep sending aid to Ukraine, which is the status quo answer. So it looks like an overwhelming majority of y'all, compared to the alternatives, are highly in support of keeping the status quo, which I can kind of agree with, because the other two options would lead us directly into World War III, and I don't know if anyone's really wanting to do that yet, but at the same time, y'all know my whole spill about morals are more important than safeties. We should step up for the things we believe in, but nonetheless, I can agree with most of y'all that that is the best option of those three, is to just continue the support. And so with that, I hope that we've answered the Enforcer fans' request of running that poll and seeing what everyone would want to do. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the last question of tonight's stream. And so who is the lucky person who got in the last question?
And the last one of the night goes to Douglas Nyquist, who says, Enforcer, have you heard anything about the intercepted phone calls between the Russian BTGs indicating some of them are at 30%?
Yes, I have. One thing though with the intercepted phone calls that I never really trust, and this is one thing I never show on this channel, is the intercepted phone calls. I'm not really sure if they're real, because it's really easy to fake something like that. All you have to do is have two people on a phone that speak Russian, and then have one of them talk out a script, and then the other one respond. So that's one thing I never really include on here, because while I am pro-Ukrainian and I want them to succeed, and I want to show that they are succeeding when they are, at the same time, I still want to be skeptical about a lot of the news that comes out and not really become a tabloid on here, because I do remember that one of those was actually found out to have been faked a very long time ago, about the first 2 weeks into the war, and then that's when I actually stopped putting them on the stream, because for a short while I actually showed them, but after hearing that one of them was faked, I was like, how in the world do we know if any of them are real or not? So I actually don't include them. But I have heard them, I have listened to them, and I can say that if they are real, which I'm not saying that they're not, I'm just saying that I'm skeptical about them, and so I don't really show them. If they are real, it's showing that there are a lot of problems right now inside of the Russian BTGs and their actual combat strength. We also know that from equipment losses, we can get a good idea that around 36 to 50 BTGs have been lost entirely in this war so far. And that was, once again, massive, because that's around a quarter or a third of the initial BTGs that they entered the war with. So with that, I hope that answered the question, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. Also, I just saw someone say that Bald and Bankrupt dropped a new video, and since this stream is ending, go ahead and check that out, because apparently it was in Syria. But with that, we've reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for showing up and giving a huge amount of support to Humane Society International. $10,000 is massive and can never be understated, and the amount of help that will give them on keeping things going. But with that, I thank you all once again. Tomorrow I will be taking the day off, but I have enjoyed this streaming week so far, and I hope you all have gotten a lot of informative news and know what's going on with the war. Once again, we put in as much effort as possible on this channel to make sure that the news is accurate. I spend about 7 to 8 hours a day compiling it and running the stream together. And so, Matthew, I'd also like to give credit. I forgot the whole reason of me saying that is I'd also like to give credit to Matthew, who's been doing the editing on our upcoming video at the moment, and has also been running the things in the background on the stream, the questions, chat moderation, and so on. So once again, I'd like to give a whole load of credit to them, because while I do work a decent bit, they work about as much as me. And so I thank everyone on the channel, and also all of you in the Lee Spring Army as well, because all of us do great things that I could have never imagined would have been, well, I would have never imagined to have been possible before this channel actually took off. And so I thank you all once again. It means a lot to me that we can all come together and do huge things every single Sunday. And with that, I will see y'all all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all once again, and I will see y'all around. Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava.
Запануй